Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. We're going to officially get started in just a minute or two. I want to make sure everyone has had the opportunity to join the webinar, so I'll give it probably just about a minute or so to let everybody join. But in the meantime, I have just popped some helpful links down into the Zoom chat for you all to take a look at. Also, feel free to let us know where you're tuning in from this evening. We always like to know where our audience is joining us from. So again, for those of us who are just joining, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. We'll get started in just a moment or two. I'll probably give it maybe another 30 seconds before we officially start. Looks like we have some people from the New York and New Jersey area here with us today. So thank you to our locals for joining us. It looks like most people have been able to join, so I'll go ahead and get things started. So good evening, everyone. My name is Isabel Molina, and I am the public programs producer here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's book talk for Remember Us, American Sacrifice, Dutch Freedom, and a Forever Promise Forged in World War II. Here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you all again for joining us today virtually. We hope that if you're able to, you'll visit the museum in person to see our current exhibitions, including Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark, the museum's first exhibition for visitors ages 9 and up. Today, closed captions are available on our program, and instructions on how to turn captions on or off are posted in the chat. If you have questions for our speakers during the program, please put them in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. Again, that's the Zoom Q&A box and not the chat. Today, we are honored to be joined by Robert Edsel and Dr. Linda Burghardt. Robert M. Edsel is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 5 nonfiction books, including Rescuing Da Vinci, Saving Italy, and The Monuments Men, which served as the basis for Academy Award recipient George Clooney's 2014 film. Mr. Edsel has been honored with the Texas Medal of the Arts, the President's Call to Service Award, the Hope for Humanity Award, presented by the Dallas Holocaust Museum, and the Foundation for the National Archives Records of Achievement Award. In 2022, the United States Army and the Smithsonian Institution made Mr. Edsel an honorary graduate of the First Army Monuments Officer Training Program, an idea Mr. Edsel advocated for nearly 20 years. He is also the founder and chairman of the Monuments Men and Women Foundation, recipient of the National Humanities Medal awarded by President George W. Bush. Dr. Linda Burghardt is a scholar in residence at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center in New York, and a journalist and author of 3 nonfiction books, 2 on Jewish topics. She wrote for the New York Times for 20 years and has contributed numerous articles and essays to The Forward, the Chicago Tribune, USA Today, and other major publications. She holds a PhD from Long Island University and has lectured to both national and international audiences on a variety of Holocaust topics. Most recently, articles of hers have appeared in the Jerusalem Post and the Times of Israel. She is the daughter of Holocaust survivors from Vienna. You can purchase Remember Us at the link in the chat. Thank you all again for joining us, and now I'm going to hand things over to Robert and Linda. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel.
Hi, thank you, Isabel. Those are lovely introductions. Hi, Robert. I loved your book. I have a whole bunch of questions to ask you, and I just thought you did a fabulous job in explaining so much. Now, a lot of your book is about being remembered, which is something that has great meaning to all of us, and that remembrance is somehow tied to how much meaning we can draw from the past. And that's often a function of how vividly the past has been experienced. So I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about that theory.
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind remarks about the book. And if it looks like I'm in the back seat of a car, your eyes are not deceiving you. I'm actually just arriving in Tampa, Florida to speak to 7,000 veterans at the American Legion annual convention, and it is storming in Tampa like you can't believe. So all that you hear about sunny Florida, don't believe it, at least presently. So I'm sorry for my casual appearance and the jostling that will go on in my responses, but I just didn't want to miss the chance to speak to your audience. I believe everybody has a desire to be remembered somehow, some way by somebody. I believe that is an innate desire of human beings. We want our lives to matter to somebody. And the people in military talk about not leaving anybody on the field of battle, but I ask the question, what good does it do if we recover all the bodies, but we don't remember who they were or what they did? And that's this transcendent story I tell in Remember Us, a unique moment set against the most tragic and horrific conflict in history. And amidst all of the horrors and the deprivations and the despicable performance by so many human beings doing inhumane things, we had the Dutch people in the south part of the country in Limburg province ask this question: how do you thank your liberators when they're no longer alive to thank? And they had the idea for a grave adoption program, asking the local people there to volunteer to adopt one grave for each person, that they would go and visit that grave multiple times during the year, birth date, death date of the soldier, and so on. And if they had the name and address of next of kin, write them and reach across the ocean, because they knew that's where the grieving was taking place inside those families. And there's never been anything like this, and we couldn't find a parallel in history that foreigners were venerated the way the Dutch promised to do it then and have continued to do it for 80 continuous years. So that, to me, there are always books about the horrible things people do. My books focus on the power of one person to make a difference,
Mhm.
and the transformation that goodness and determination to do something honorable and demonstrate grace is what I am interested in knowing. What causes people to do that against the face of all the odds saying, well, that'll never work, or what good's it going to do? The answer is it can do a lot of good. And so it's something that I have embraced, and it is now part of the project of the Monuments Men and Women Foundation to not only assist the Dutch in locating the rest of the American families that they do not have contact with, but also asking this question: why in the United States do we not have a grave adoption program for our fallen heroes that are buried on our own soil, cared for by Americans? And that will be a large part of the subject of my speech at the American Legion on Wednesday.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating concept. And this is something that's very, very important. I'm thrilled to hear that you're going ahead with sending this theme further out into the world. Now, you also dealt, I think, in the book a great deal with the sense of universal grief, that beyond the national or racial bonds that hold us back, that all humans suffer. And could you talk a little bit about that? Tell us how it relates to your book.
Well, yes, because I travel a lot, and I'm in all different kinds of environments and countries filled with people that are affluent, like in Switzerland when I was there recently, to Mexico, where you have few people that are affluent and many people that are poor, who still find a way to have happiness in their life. Thank God money isn't the determinant, because it really would be an unfair world.
Mhm.
But I remember when I was in Russia about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, filming a TV program, and there were these women getting off of the bus I was at this restaurant on the highway on the way to the airport, and it's where we happened to stop. And it was 4:30 in the afternoon. It was pitch dark, and these women were getting off the bus, and there was the reemergence of this animosity that now exists with Russia and the United States, understandably so, given what's happening in Ukraine. And I thought to myself, these poor women they're focused on the same thing my mom used to be focused about. How do I put dinner on the table? How do I provide for my kids? They're not engaged in geopolitics. They don't give a rat's concern about the internationalism between the United States and Russia. They're just trying to get by. And
Mhm.
I embrace that, as I do when I'm in Mexico and I'm at a bus stop standing there with people that may wait 2 hours for a bus. They don't think about calling their lawyer to sue somebody over the fact, wow, what a crummy system this is. They find some way to take joy in standing there and being patient and waiting because they don't have expectations like we do in this country. The bottom line is people aren't that different from each other. We we are bombarded with messaging all around us, but people at their core want to have a better world for their kids. They want to be able to provide for them. I mean, in a place like Ukraine, or what we see going on in the Middle East right now, they're trying to figure out, how do I keep my kids safe? How does the roof not collapse in now? How do I make sure there's food on the table? Things like school aren't even on their radar screen right now because of the
Mhm.
emergencies. So
Mhm.
I just think we have it so good in 2025, and because of what this World War II generation did do, we've had 80 years that's the world that we've known, where we can make assumptions that there won't be catastrophic wars. There've been plenty of problems. It's not a perfect world, but the trend and development for mankind's been in a positive direction. And unfortunately, now we've breeded generations of Americans and others in Western world who just assume this is the way it always is. Freedom's free, right? We turn the water on, we get hot water, and we've lost. We're complete. We've raised generations that are totally out of touch with what deprivation and hardship are. But
Mhm.
our parents, our grandparents, who grew up during the Depression, and then, if
Mhm.
that wasn't bad enough, have to fight a war, either trying to survive in Europe, as so many of your relatives did,
Mhm.
just the bare survival, just finding a way to make it to the next day, or
Mhm.
those like my dad in the United States, who was 18 and was on a troop ship in Saipan, Okinawa, and Nagasaki as an 18-year-old Marine from Oklahoma. He'd never even been outside the state lines.
Mhm.
He knew what hardship was, and he got a whole nother education of what it was like being a Marine at 18 years old. People today just don't have that understanding of how bad it can be. And we talk a lot about what we don't have and how unfair the world is. And of course, it's unfair. Yes, our parents told us that. But there's so many things that we have that are good, that are precious. And the
Mhm.
most valuable things, our friendships, our health, our freedom, time, they're priceless. They don't have a
Yes,
cost.
that's right. Very true. Very true. Now, do you have a direct relationship with the Dutch, since that's the group that you wrote about? And
Well, I have two
see,
kinds of relationships. I have a lot of friendships with the people that we worked with doing the research on the book. There was 8 years of research into documenting. I picked the 11 different men and a couple of women through whose experience to tell the story. Some were combat soldiers, paratroopers, Medal of Honor recipient. One was a Black American who was a gravedigger during the war. A horrible, horrible assignment. There weren't any coffins. All these boys were buried in bed sheets that were lowered into the ground. So it was a very hands-on, tactile job that had a monotony and endlessness to it because the killing just continued. And also an army chaplain. I wanted to have that experience. And then there's a fantastic character who reminds me of my good friend Harry Ettlinger, a monuments man, who was a Jew from Karlsruhe who escaped with his family Nazi Germany when he was 13, shortly before his bar mitzvah, and they immigrated to the United States. In this book, we have a character named Stephen Mossbacher, who it wasn't his Stephen wasn't his given name, but he was born in Nuremberg to a father who was an OB-GYN. And he was forced out of the country and fortunately managed to get out with his son, who was 13 also. They immigrated and ended up in Toledo. And then this young man at 18 was drafted into the army and
Mhm.
went to go fight in his old country, a war for his new country. Stephen
Mhm.
Mossbacher, he was an intelligence officer and a Ritchie boy. So
Mhm.
great character. And he wrote the most beautiful letters to his father, and his father just worshiped his son. And there came the tragic moment when letters from his son stopped being received in the United States, and then a notification about why. But
Mhm.
it's a beautiful story, and Stephen Mossbacher was he was a good Jew, but he also was he was a great human being because he when he saw injustices such as Belgians yelling at Black Americans on a truck, and Stephen Mossbacher spoke French, and he knew what they were yelling were racial epithets.
Mhm.
And he was so angry about it because he knew it was wrong. And of course, these black soldiers had no idea that they were being made fun of. But
Mhm.
he wrote about this in a letter to his father. So at 18, 19 years old, he had an appreciation, a good understanding of what was right and wrong and how to treat people and respect. And of course, you can't, you can't demand that from other people if you're not willing to demonstrate it yourself. And Stephen Mossbacher did that.
Mhm. Yes, yes. I know you used letters and diaries from people that were really hadn't been seen before and other kinds of historical resources. And I wonder, how did you gather them? They can be very difficult to find.
Well, they are, and I suppose me and my great team of researchers, we're all truffle hounds, so we're always digging, and we just don't take no for an answer. We always feel like there's another layer of the onion to peel back. But I
Mhm.
mentioned our colleagues in the Netherlands who were a great help, and in a way, I think it took a non-Dutch person to really appreciate the fullness of this story. The there was a certain prejudice in this portion of the Netherlands, ironically against women because it was very much a man's world. And there were all sorts of explanations for why one of the key characters in the book, a woman named Emily Michels van Kesnick, who was 37 and was the mom of 12 children. She had 3 during the war. And she was the wife of the mayor of Maastricht. And when the United States Army and government refused to provide the names and addresses of the next of kin, in effect blocking this Dutch grave adoption program from being fully realized. I mean, they thought it's a very nice thing to go memorialize a person who's dead, but where the real magic of the concept was to reach across the ocean and befriend the people that were grieving, the people that are still alive that have to work through this, whose lives are never going to be the same.
Mhm.
And the government blocked them from doing that. And Emily Michels van Kesnick interceded and wrote a letter to President Truman. And she said,
Mm.
pardon the impudence of my letter coming from this woman and blah, blah, blah. Well, for years, those in the Netherlands that wrote about this attributed motives to her doing this, like she was trying to rehabilitate her husband's career, or there was always some motive other than why can't a woman, just like a guy, do something that's good for goodness sake. And there
Mhm.
wasn't any agenda other than what she said, which is, and she wrote this in her letter to President Truman, I know this, if I'm a mom of 11 at the time of children ranging from 14 years old to 3 months. And if one of my boys was killed on American soil, I know I would be beholding forever if an American mother would go and visit my son's grave. And that
Mhm.
was her motivation. It was to
Mhm.
do the right thing. And
Mhm.
that is the success of this program. It's not any superhuman effort by any one person or some overarching ingenuity. It's the fact that each person did what they were able to do. And being the wife of a mayor, she had more resources, she was more worldly. She spoke multiple languages. And when that failed, her letter to Truman was beautiful, perfect. But
Mhm.
the army didn't change their position. She got on a plane and left her kids behind and flew to the United States, and for 5 weeks traveled all over the eastern portion of the country and stayed with veterans' families every single night in a different home. And she spoke to young war widows who were young enough to be her daughters. She spoke to moms, fathers, sisters, and to everybody. She said, the day will come when you'll have to make a decision to leave your son overseas or not, or bring them back. Leave your boys with us. We will watch over them like our own forever.
Mhm.
And here, 81 years later, they are still doing it. And this is the second part of the relationship we have with the Dutch. The Monuments Men and Women Foundation, which exists to preserve our shared cultural heritage, has entered into a joint venture with the Dutch Foundation for Adopting Graves to use the visibility of the book and my role as messenger to raise awareness that there are 10,000 Dutch adopters out there for the 10,000 boys and 4 women that are buried at the cemetery, and they're only in contact with 2,000 American families. There's 8,000 families they haven't reached yet. So our joint venture is called the Forever Promise Project, to raise awareness and get people to contact the foreverpromise.org website. We don't charge anybody for it. They can go there and search the database of the list of all the men and women that are buried there. And if there's someone that's in their family that's buried there, we have a short questionnaire. What's your relationship? Are you aware of the Dutch adoption program? Would you like to be connected with your Dutch adopter? And we have so far, just in a couple of months, connected 250 Americans to the Dutch adopters of family members that having no idea that such a program existed.
Mm.
So it's God's work we're doing. It's so heartwarming every day to get up and see the nice comments we get from people and how meaningful it is to them to be put in touch with people that, although they're on a different side of the world, they're not different from each other.
Right, right. Yes, yes, very, very true and very well said. Yeah. Now, I know the Dutch made a major effort to thank their liberators, and that seems to be one of the themes of the book. And I thought I'd ask you to tell us a little bit about your ideas about the power of gratitude.
Well, we've gotten to be very, very good at 2025 at complaining and griping. I think we're out of practice on saying thank you. And
Mm,
my wife and I have. I'm an old dad. We have 2 boys, 7 and 9. Today was their first day of school, second and third grades.
mm,
And like all kids, all American kids probably, there's the night that they don't want to eat what's on their plate, or they're unhappy about this. And I'm a fairly patient person to a point, but boy, I tell you, I lose my sense of humor because I tell them, look, if you're in Ukraine, you're lucky to have a meal on the table, or even
mhm.
luckier if it's warm. You're not going to have to worry about the roof of our house collapsing on you. You got a nice, safe school to go to, God willing, with the school shootings and stuff. Um, these are things that I know from my parents' generation and the war that they went through in the Great Depression. We shouldn't take those things for granted, but we do because
Mhm.
it's all anybody's known. So part of the story here with remembrance is to appreciate just how good we have it. Now, are there people out there that are suffering? Absolutely. Are there some horrible things going on in our country? Without question. Alarming. But there's a lot of goodness too. And I get frustrated as much as the next person does with things I see, sometimes different people, how they respond to stuff. But about the time, this has been my experience at 68 years old, about the time you're ready to give up on somebody, some human being will do something to surprise you and inspire you and remind you, you know what, there's a lot of good people out there. And I think right now in our country, there is a groundswell of goodwill among people that want to do something. They just need some guidance and direction about what it is to do. How can I make a difference? And that's what this whole idea of grave adoption program is about, because today we have 335 million Americans that are being protected by 1.5 million men and women in uniform.
Mhm.
In World War II, we had 125 million Americans and we had 16 million men and women in uniforms. So, but everybody worked in a factory. Everybody did something. They had their victory guards. And the point was, then everybody was somehow connected to military and everybody shared in the sacrifice, whether it was through rationing or whatever it was. Today, I think this is a horrible development. we've created a clear divorce between those that serve in military and then everybody else. And unless
Mhm.
you're one of the small families, small number of people that do have someone in military, you don't have to care. And I think that's a horrible development. I think we need to care. Now, I know some people sit there and say, well, they volunteered. It's an all volunteer army. You tell me, if your house is on fire and the fireman comes and puts it out, the guy who's being paid to do it, or the gal who's being paid to do it, who volunteered for that job, tell me that you're just going to say, okay, that's great. Thank you for putting it out. You know, you just did your job. Is that what you're going to think? Or you're going to be
Mhm.
thinking, oh my God, thank you. You saved our possessions, someone in our family, etc. So, you know, I don't want to go overboard, but we should be finding ways to have people connected, not just to people in military, but public service. Those
Mhm.
aren't two nasty words. Those are
Yeah.
beautiful words. And
Mhm.
we've lost a sense of how good and important public service is and how many wonderful people there are engaged in public service doing really important things. And unfortunately, you know, it has kind of become a punching bag for our society right now, and that's a great tragedy in my view, and I hope that
Very,
changes.
very much so. Are you in favor of bringing back the draft in order to get more people involved in the military?
Well, you know, I have all sorts of ideas, but
Mhm.
what I not necessarily the draft because I wouldn't narrow it that much. I wish, Robert Edsel wishes, that at 18 everybody had 2 years of public service and there would be an
Mhm.
approved list. No one's exempt
Mhm.
from it. Nobody can go to college before 20. Nobody. And 2 years of public
Mhm.
service, it can be Doctors Without Borders, it could be, you know, missionary work. I don't care what it is, but there'd be an approved list that everybody, rich people, poor people, everybody in between, can go down the list and choose. And the point is, it's 2 years of public service about something other than you. And you can
Mhm.
realize that the world does not revolve around you because you will realize that eventually, if we could have it happen sooner, then education wouldn't be wasted on our youth and you'd have some real world experience and you'd get a chance to see how many people in the world, no matter how bad you've got it, have it worse than you. And
Mhm.
I think that would be a priceless, transformative development in the United States. But for something that dramatic to happen, it would take great leadership. And it
Mhm.
takes great leadership speaking aspirationally, talking about a world or having a vision that everybody likes the sound of that and is prepared to sacrifice to get that great outcome rather than talking about who did this, whose fault it is, all the
Mhm.
things that are wrong, etc. And so
Mhm.
we have to see leadership differently. And I think it's been a while since we've had that kind of leadership like General Eisenhower, you know, he was accused of being the do nothing president. We got actually got a lot done. And
Yes.
uh and he was a remarkable leader during war, during the military. So you know, I don't wear Pollyanna glasses. I realize there are plenty of difficult problems, but it seems to me we're more interested in finding ways to argue and litigate old problems that we already solved because we don't want to deal with the problems that we have right now that really need to be addressed. And that takes courage and it takes leadership and take someone explaining why it's critical that we do that if we're going to have a better world for our kids.
Mhm. Yes. Now, do you have a new book in mind? Kind of
Oh
sounds
my Lord, no, no,
like
this has
make a
been
good one.
8 years in the making writing this one, and we have so much work to do. I feel like this grave adoption program is an opportunity to transform the country in this way.
Mhm.
We that you know, I'm 68, as I said. Those that are people that are my age had a parent that was involved in World War II.
Mhm.
They had, parents or grandparents that were Depression era babies,
Right. Mhm.
and if we ask a 30 or 40-year-old in the street, you know, mm, what's freedom cost? Is freedom free? I mean,
Mhm.
why should we be upset that they think freedom's free because it's all they've ever known? But
Mhm.
we know otherwise, and we
Mhm.
know that not because of school, but because of our parents or grandparents.
Mhm.
We did also go to school when civics were taught. And
Mhm.
that was reminded that was informed to us. We learned about those things. Today, we're not going to have any more World War II generation people. They're all dead, or soon will be. And schools don't teach civics. I mean, we're lucky if they teach history.
Mhm.
So how do we change that? And my idea with the domestic grave adoption program is to engage young people. And who are the teachers going to be? The teachers are going to be our soldiers, men and women, all wars, who have been buried, who have
Mhm,
great legacies, who would yearn to be remembered. And the people that should remember them are our younger people. They
mhm,
should get to know them. They should be able to write about them. They can adopt the graves. And it's a way, I think it's an investment, and we educate the people that we can educate, which are younger people, because it's going to be very, very difficult to educate people that are my age. They're sure, they believe what they want to believe. No ill intent mentioned, but I think we're banging our head against the wall. We've got to go to younger people and get them engaged and help them understand just how fortunate they have been and who are the people that made that possible.
mhm, mhm. Yes,
So that
yeah.
that that I mean, it's an ambitious idea, but and I say to people, look, I don't have any pride of authorship about my idea. If you have a better idea on how we can transform the country, bring it to me. I'll get behind your idea. But I think
Mhm,
it's not just a good idea; it's the right thing to do. We ask a lot of our men and women in uniform. There are immense challenges with suicides in the military, and of course, I think the great unoverlooked heroes aren't just the men and women that are in uniform, but it's the families. It's more times than not a mom that's trying to figure out how do you run a household? How do you raise kids? In particular, I can speak from personal experience raising boys when the dad's not there because he's off, somewhere else doing this, and they're probably working a job and trying to keep them in school. It's
mhm,
just, it's a borderline impossible task. And for any citizens to not have their heartstrings tugged, being aware of that and wanting if there's some way to help and reach out to them, well, I think that's un-American. So I think it's something that we can do. And back to why the Dutch program worked, because everybody did something they were able to do.
yes, yes. Mm. Now, you've been called a master historian and you've been called a master storyteller. Do you relate more to one or the other of those accolades?
Very kind compliments, both, but I believe I'm a messenger.
Oh,
My
well,
books, my books are not written to write books. They're written because that really two themes now. One was the monuments, men and women, and
mm-hmm,
my interest and curiosity, which is how I got involved in it. How did all these works of art survive and who are the people that saved them? And all I heard from people that I asked was, "Wow, that's a great question. What's the answer?" And I said, "Well, I don't
mm-hmm,
know. You're European. You live here. You should know." And they said, "I never
mm-hmm,
thought." Well, I
mm-hmm,
hadn't thought about it either. But stands to reason, we all know enough about what happened in Europe and the degree of destruction that there's no way these things that we go see today could have been there could have survived had they stayed where they were. And we're not talking about moving a few million things. We're talking about moving tens of millions of things that represent people. One
mm-hmm,
of the one of the monuments men I loved most, and I loved them all, but this one I really loved a lot was in fact he used to say that he was my rabbi.
mm-hmm,
Was Colonel Seymour Pomeranz. He was very particular about the colonel, even to the day he died. But he later became a rabbi.
mm-hmm,
And he was a wonderful man, and he was in charge of the collecting point in Offenbach, Germany, where they took all of the religious objects and millions of books stolen from thousands of the most important libraries in Europe, and there were 1,000 Torah scrolls there. And I asked him, here's a curious question. Has anybody ever had 1,000 Torah scrolls in one place? And he looked at me because he said, no, these are deeply sacred objects that are meant for synagogue. Well, anyway,
mm-hmm,
it created situational ethic challenges. What do you do with these Torahs when so many of the synagogues have been burned and destroyed? And they found solutions, elegant solutions, to place them at some synagogues in Israel, but new synagogues being built in England and in the United States and other countries that
mm-hmm,
Jews were relocating to. So these objects, because we're always talking about things, really
mm-hmm,
aren't things at all. They're the collective memory of a community that are
mm-hmm,
put to use and take on an even higher purpose than just the religiosity of them. And it was always so beautiful in speaking to him about this to see how they had found a way to do something beautiful out of even these tragic circumstances.
Mhm.
So, when I met these monuments men, the one that influenced me the most was a man named S. Lane Faison Jr., who was a professor at Williams College. And after I met with him, when his son told me I was wasting my time, he's 98 years old, he doesn't remember much. I spent 4 hours talking to him. And as I got up to leave, he grabbed hold of my hand and pulled me right up to his face and said, "I've been waiting to meet you all my life."
Oh,
And I was bewildered. I did not know what he meant, but I
mhm,
did know what he meant. And I
mhm.
thought about it day after day after day. And 10 days later, I received a phone call that he had died.
Ah, yeah.
And I went to the memorial service and I asked his sons, "What in the world happened? Your dad seemed like he was in pretty good shape." And they said, "After he got through meeting with you, he called us all and he said, 'I'm ready to go. Say your goodbyes.' And he went into a coma and he died." And I knew what he wanted me to do was tell their story.
Yes.
Tell their story, be the messenger, and that was it. So the purpose of writing the book wasn't to tell a great story. I mean, I felt a duty to do that, but it was to, I hope, get a film made so that we could raise global awareness about who these men and women were and what they did. It's
Mhm,
the same template here. I wasn't looking for this story, but when I was introduced to one of these two women that I focus on in the book, a lady who was still alive, she was 86 when I met her, and I knew her the last 10 years of her life, who had watched over the grave of one of the Americans that I write about in the book,
mhm,
a man she very much loved. I felt duty bound to go meet her. And my wife said, "Do you have some ambitions here?" And I said, "Ambitions? Like what?" And she said, "To write another book." And I said, "No, no, are you kidding? No, I mean, she's the last person to have seen this monuments man before he was killed. I just
mhm,
feel an obligation to go talk to her and find out." And in the
mhm,
course of meeting her, she said to me, "Have you been to the Netherlands American Cemetery?" And I said, "Yes, yes, I've been there." And she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes, I'm very sure. I've been there." And she said, "So you know about the grave adoption program?" And I said, "The what?"
ah,
And she said, "The grave adoption program." And I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." So I started digging into it, and I was in disbelief
mhm,
that people would make a promise that 80 years later they're continuing to honor. I mean, in the
yeah,
world we live in, people say, "I'll call you for lunch." They don't call. Half the marriages that begin with "I do" end up with "I don't." And here, 80 years later, they're still doing it. There's a waiting list of 1,000 people in the Netherlands to become adopters. They
wow,
hold it in such reverence. So I just thought, there's such an important message in this. And the least we as Americans can do is help the Dutch who are trying to honor Americans.
mhm,
But then it has evolved from there in my thinking about, well, this is great that they do it for us. Why don't we do it for us? And
yes,
if we're going to do it, who should do it? Older
mhm,
people? Well, that's not a bad idea, but maybe younger people. Like get them engaged in history and don't use that cell phone. Go to a cemetery wherever you are. Find somebody, World War II veteran, someone that was killed in Afghanistan, Iraq. I mean, unfortunately, there's plenty of candidates, and go learn about that person, write about that person,
mhm,
be a beacon of light for the memory of that person. And after a couple of years in high school or whatever, find someone to be your successor, to be the adopter, and
mhm,
bring memory to that. So to me, it's, I mean, Jewish history, as I understand it, so much so involves memory and collective history and the pride that Jews feel in their in the history of their peoples and the sagas and challenges. But this is a transcendent idea. This isn't just about Judaism or Christianity or anything. I mean, it's about being a human being, and our parents did teach us about the difference between right and wrong, and it's the right thing to do.
mhm. So there's a real call to action in this book.
There is,
Mhm,
absolutely there is, again, the nicest things that the things that I've had said about me that have been beautiful compliments, and you've paid me several, and I appreciate them, but the ones that have always meant the most to me, I guess the two, is when I speak about these things and elderly people come up to me and say, "You're authentic."
Mm,
because they've heard it all. I mean, they've heard every pitch and fantastic, et cetera, but they know whether people agree with me or not, I believe it. And I
mhm,
am truly grateful. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to represent these men and women I talk about. But the other thing that's meant more than anything is when the children, my age or older, of the monuments men and women, and some of the people I write about in the book have said to me, the visibility that you've brought to my parent,
mhm,
uh, at the late stage in their life where they don't feel well, they've lost so many friends, a lot of them have lost, siblings,
mhm,
kids. You gave their life meaning. You
mhm,
added years to their life. And their last years, unlike as it turns out for most the rest of us as we get older, and we don't feel well and we have sadnesses, their lives, they were people listened to them. They were old people that got heard.
mhm,
And that was a beautiful thing that was a completely unintended consequence of our work, but it was a beautiful thing to witness. And it helped me understand so much about getting older and how important hope is as we get older and have something to look forward to. And it's something that I hold so dearly in my life experience, having a chance to see what it was like for people that no one really cared because they looked at them and they were old and kind of discarded them. And then once they had a certain notoriety because of the book or the film,
mhm,
everybody wanted to hear what they had to say. And they walked with a little bit of a bounce in their step
mhm,
and they had a smile on their face and they felt relevant.
mhm,
And it's a beautiful thing. It also speaks sadly about the irrelevance that too oftentimes we associate in our youthful country with elderly people. But the answers to all of our problems, they know them. They've been through this. They've seen this broad spectrum of our country's history. And
mhm.
think of the transformations that they have witnessed in their lifetimes. As difficult as the problems are we face today, there are none of them that can't be overcome with the same type of grit and shared sense of sacrifice that they lived their lives demonstrating.
Mhm. Yes, yes, very true. Yes, and that human connection that comes from work like
It's
that.
everything. I
Mhm,
mean, I hear, I have a son from a previous marriage who talks about how difficult it is to meet people. And I say,
mhm.
well, did you say hi? It begins with saying hi. Tell them your name and say hi. Ask them how they're doing and look them in the eye and care about what
Mhm,
the response
mhm.
is.
Yes.
Social media means the opposite. It's a disconnect. And I think that's what people really do want. They really want to be connected to other people. And that's the success of this adoption program is every time we make these connections, then we get emails from people or letters, it's months later telling us, I went over there and I spent Christmas with these people. I mean, they've become close, close friends because they realize we're not, maybe we have a little bit of a language issue, but we're, we have the same type shared life experience. And that's what people want.
Right. Very true. Very true. Can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? Do you write every day? Do you write in bursts? Do you dictate and have somebody
Well,
write for
I've
you?
been fortunate to have, I mean, 3 of the books I have written have been entirely my own. 2 I've written with Brett Witter, who's an
Mhm,
outstanding writer and a dear friend, and, those have been driven by, first of all, Brett's just a talent unto himself, but these stories, The Monuments Men and then Remember Us, they're complicated stories. I had so many people that over my 8 years of research that I would kind of explain what Remember Us was about, they would say to me, "Okay, I get it now, but how in the world are you ever gonna get that condensed into a book?" And I said, "I don't
mhm.
know. That is the problem. The architecture of telling the story is so difficult and it's made difficult because they're epic stories. Remember
Yes.
Us is set against the backdrop of World War II, but it's not a World War II story. It's about people. It's an eternally applicable story about kindness and gratitude and the
Mhm,
best of human beings set
mhm.
against the worst times that we've known so far. But I feel that, in both cases, there was a time urgency because I wanted to get the Monuments Men written while there were still Monuments Men and women alive to be
Mm,
able to read their story. And my book editor, my book agent said, you know, how long do you think it's going to take you to research? And I said, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. It took 6.
Mhm.
And he said, well, how many of them do you think will be alive in 6 years? And I said, I don't know,
Mm.
maybe none.
Yeah.
So I couldn't do both, and I
Mhm.
needed help. And likewise on this story, Brett just made really, really important contributions on how we were going to tell the story and shape it. We had a lot of false starts, but we spent a lot of time in the Netherlands just walking the cemetery and being with people that were adopters and asking the kinds of questions that you're asking me to understand why would they do this? Why would they care so much? Okay, it's great. You did it 10 years. Enough's enough. Move on. But they haven't moved on. And they take their children to the cemetery and they make them stand. They don't make them. They have them stand in front of a tombstone and tell them what you're able to think, what you're
Mhm.
able to say is a freedom that was paid for by the lives of these American boys and girls who
Mm.
had that freedom and gave it up.
Mhm.
Boy,
Mhm.
that's a heck of a classroom. And that's what they do with that. That's what they do with the cemetery and do with the classroom. They've turned it into a classroom. And that cemetery, as paradoxical as it is filled with life.
Ah.
And that's such a beautiful story. So that's what we've wanted to capture. And there was the urgency of trying to get it done and remember us as monuments men. And I just needed help. I had 3 different researchers and then of course I was meeting with so many families that had these letters and the archives.
Yes.
And it takes a lot of trust for families to open up and share these deeply intimate experiences that have been documented, in particular when it involves the loss of someone that
Mhm.
they loved so much. But they did trust me, and I believe Remember Us um, has demonstrated that that trust was well founded.
Oh, yeah, there's tremendous respect in the book for the
Yeah, I
people
think
that you
so.
interviewed. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you so much.
I see Isabella's back. I
Nice.
think it's time for questions.
Yes, I tried to quietly reappear for everyone. So we have some lovely audience questions that I want to make sure we get to at
Sure.
least a few of them. So a reminder to anyone in the audience, if you haven't yet submitted a question, but you feel inspired by any of the answers, feel free to submit one as we're speaking. Um, so we have a few questions sort of about the inspiration and the process for writing this book. And I know you spoke a bit about this earlier about, your inspiration, your hopes for this book. But we have someone who's wondering if the inspiration for this book was tied or related to in any way the research that you did for Monuments Men.
Yes, it was. There were 2 monuments men that were killed during combat. One's British, and one was American. The American's actually buried in the Netherlands American Cemetery. That was a that wasn't a determinant factor at all. But because I knew, and I wrote at the end of Monuments Men that his grave was watched over by a 19-year-old girl from the Netherlands named Frieda, who wrote, imagine it, 19 years old, in 1945, in October. She wrote Harvard University and asked for the name and address of his mother because they'd spent a lot of time with him. He'd been in their home, he was a friend of their family's. And all they could remember about him was that he had attended Harvard and had taught there as a professor of architecture. And sure enough, the Ivy League universities had war registrars that fielded many requests like this, and she got a
Mhm.
response within 2 weeks. And
Oh,
she wanted to write Hutchhausen's mother to say, and this is what she wrote in her letter: I'm 19 years old. I walk 5 miles many days of the week to and from the cemetery to place flowers on his grave, and I want his mother to know I will watch over his grave. It's all she could think to do. And so she was an adopter long before there was
mhm.
an adoption program. It was an example of the Dutch doing whatever they could do that was the decent thing to do. So it was Frieda who I that in 2015 Hutchhausen's nephew wrote me and
Mhm.
said, "Hey, I just got back from a meeting in Europe, and by the way, I had a lovely visit with Frieda." And I thought, Frieda, Frieda, Frieda. I don't know any Frieda. Who in the world does he think I know? And then I thought the only Frieda I know is that young girl I wrote about at the end of Monuments Men,
Mhm.
and then was my, epiphany of, oh my God, she's still alive. Well, it never
Mhm,
occurred to me to go find her because I didn't need it to finish Monuments Men. But that's when I went to England. She'd married a British soldier after the war to go meet her because I felt duty bound. She's the last person to have seen him before went on this mission where he was killed, and he was killed less than a month before the war was over, right at the end.
Mm,
And so I went to go talk to her just innocently. Tell me about your story. What was it like being losing your freedom for 4 years? What was it like
mhm,
getting it back? Why did and that's when she asked me, do you know about the grave adoption program? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. So it's a coincidence in a way that Hutchhausen's there. He is one of the key figures in the book. He's one of the 11 soldiers I write about. And this beautiful relationship between Frieda and Walter Hutchhausen, who was twice her age. He was about 40 years old. And it's a beautiful kind of love. It's a first love. It's that I have no idea why I feel these tingling sensations. I don't know what
mhm,
this is. She doesn't know. Is it a romantic love? Is it a, but he was the first man to ever look at her like an adult and
mhm,
ask and speak to her and want to hear what she had to say. It was the respect for her
mhm,
as a person, and that's what transformed her. And because she realized she wasn't a girl anymore, she was a young lady, she was a young
mhm,
woman, and someone had recognized her. And it was hard to understand at the beginning because, our world's different and I don't know,
mhm,
we jumped to conclusions. And here it was so simple to understand. What was that like the first time any of us fell in love? The first time
mhm,
we felt these feelings and were just overwhelmingly confused about what the heck is this
mhm,
all about? But it was a beautiful story, and I knew Frida the last 8, 9 years of her life. I delivered her eulogy
mm.
in London. I loved her very much. She was a wonderful woman, and many of the records and the letters and information we're able to use, I got from her. She shared with
Mm.
us.
Thank you for sharing what an incredible story. Um, we have some related questions. In particular, someone wants to know how you decided which individuals you were going to focus on in this book, and then also how you first encountered their stories and decided to put them in.
Well, at the end of the war, by May 1946, let's say a year after the war, there were 17,800 Americans buried at the cemetery.
Mm,
By far the largest World War II cemetery we had. You can't write about 170 in a book, much less, 17. It's just too many. It's too overwhelming.
mhm,
Even at 11, we're stretching the margin. But I was determined, and I'm blatantly obvious about this. I was determined to remind Americans, you know what, we're a country of immigrants. We were, we are, we always will be, and that's a good thing. And so I had a Native American, I had Black soldiers, I had a Jew, I had a Christian, I had one person that was older, I had a lot that were really, really young, I had an orphan. I tried to
mhm,
find every difference that I could find without ever, making it a message point so
mhm,
people could see, I love that person. Well, that's great because they're really, in a way, very different than you. So embrace that difference. That's a good thing. That person helped preserve the freedom that we enjoy. And there were so many great stories that we just kept going through looking for information. And then I needed to be able to find support documentation to make the final choices. I mean, there were a couple people. There's one great story of a father and son, and I wanted to use the son. They were both in the war. The son was killed. They spent Christmas together, and then he was killed shortly after that. But the story didn't go anywhere. I mean, there wasn't anything. It was just a great story that I could tell now, and everybody would feel their heart hurt a little bit, and also feel lifted by the beauty of their relationship. But they didn't do anything. But everyone needed to be somehow engaged to Margraten, where the cemetery is. Not everyone in the book dies. Some people do,
mhm.
some don't. Um, and not everybody was involved with the burials at the cemetery or anything like that. But everyone's lives was somehow touched in this area. So that was a common denominator that they had to have.
Thank you for sharing. Taking it in a little bit of a different direction, we've had a couple people also ask about the reaction to this book. And in general, what has the reaction been, but also if different audiences have reacted in different ways, if US readers versus Dutch readers have reacted differently, or you also spoke about trying to reach younger audiences, if you've noticed that younger readers have reacted differently than older readers.
It's a very popular book in the Netherlands. It made their New York Times equivalent bestseller
Wonderful.
list. But I think it's a much smaller country than ours, but
Mhm.
there's a quite a dividing line between the South. The people in Amsterdam say, "Oh, you're
Right.
going to the South, like you're going a million miles away." It's 2 hours away. I'm from Texas. When we get in the car and drive from Dallas to California, when we're in El Paso, we drove 15 hours and we're still not halfway. So when they tell us it's that far away and it's 2 hours, we kind of giggle. But the people in Amsterdam in the north had a very different experience. They went through the hunger winter. Hitler was determined to punish them for not rolling over and embracing what he considered were more or less Germans.
Mhm.
And so he tried to starve them. He stole their things. Of course, horrific things happened to Jews in the Netherlands. As a percentage of population, suffered more than any particular country. I mean, just horrific complicity in some cases. And so, like all things during war, you have the best and worst behavior of people, and you
Mhm.
can make that go whichever direction you want to try and make it go. But it was such a different experience, so they don't understand their history about what happened in the South, which was very different.
Mhm.
I don't think there's a prejudice against the people in the South, but they certainly look at it differently, thinking, "Well, you guys got off easy. We were suffering for 9 more months and really suffering."
Mhm.
And that is true. But I think, it's always quicksand when you're trying to get into speaking not in superlatives, but in a very complimentary way, because sometimes people get competitive and feel like, well, wait a minute, we did good things. For instance, I've had a couple of people that are familiar with how caring the French in the Normandy area have been towards Americans say, well, they've done great things. And I've said, I
Mhm.
never said that they didn't. In fact, I specifically mentioned a lady named Madame Renaud, who was also, by coincidence, the wife of the mayor in Saint Mary and she spent her whole life thanking Americans and staying in touch with airborne troops that descended upon
Mhm.
her town and freed them. And the circumstances were different, or else perhaps they would have done the same thing. But the point was that they didn't. And the Dutch
Mhm.
did do it, and the Dutch didn't have to do it. It wasn't preordained. So when I'm talking about the remarkable things that happened in the Netherlands, I am in no way being dismissive of people
Mhm.
in other countries that venerate Americans then and today. I'm not saying the Dutch are superlative human beings to everybody else. Hardly. That's just not true. I'm merely making the point that there were a group of people in one area that didn't have to ask the question, how do you think your liberators when they're no longer alive to thank? And didn't have to
Mhm.
go through an immensely difficult process to make this thing work and make it still work today. And yet they did it. And can't we look at that without thinking as an American or thinking about as a guy or girl or white, black, whatever your background is, and just look at it as a human being and think how beautiful it is that there are people like that out there. And they'll surprise you because they'll emerge in the place that you last expect to see them,
Mhm.
that are willing to do something noble to help other people. That's the story. That's what we should embrace.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. What an incredible answer. I know we're just at 7, so we're right at time. But I want to thank everyone for submitting questions. And apologies, I know we didn't get to everybody's question. I also, of course, want to give a huge thank you to you, Robert and Linda, for joining us today and making it through the Florida rain to be here and speak to our audience. We really appreciate it. And I, of course, encourage everyone in our audience to purchase Remember Us, which you can do at the link that I've just put in the Zoom chat for everyone. We also hope that if you enjoyed today's program, you'll consider making a donation to support the museum, which you can do at mjhnyc.org/support. We also hope to see all of you for our upcoming programs, which you can find at mjhnyc.org/current events. Both of those links are in the chat for you as well, so you don't have to write those down. Thank you all again so much for joining us. We hope you have a great night and that we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Linda, very much.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
thank you. Thank you, Robert. Great experience. Thank you, Isabel.
And for
Thank
all
you.
the visitors, go visit foreverpromise.org and make sure that if there's
Yes,
someone there that you know of, that a family you know of that's buried overseas, please, please contact us and help us make that connection.
definitely.
Wonderful.
Thank you
Thank
all so
you.
much.